Now on to removing this bushing. And this is usually a huge pain. A lot of people buy or rent this kit. This is what's called a ball joint press set. I find that this is just too big for me to be able to use it. There's not enough space in any configuration for me to be able to get it where I need it to be and not break anything when I remove the bushing. So we're gonna do a do-it-yourself press, which I just got all the parts at a Home Depot. I use a 3/8 threaded rod. This one's 8 inches long. I also got a 6-inch long one for the install. I need a little longer for the pressing it out, just because you need to add more components along it. So we're gonna use this 3/8 8-inch long threaded rod with a hex head on one end and a nut on the other end. A whole bunch of washers that I just bought in the same section. I just bought them very thick because you are going to bend them. You're going to use a socket. If you don't have a 1 1/16 socket, this is exactly the fitment that you need to push out that bushing without damaging anything. And then we're just going to use this piece from this kit to go on the very end, and I'll show you what it looks like assembled. And here's our do-it-yourself press. So as you see, ton of washers because it tends to bend them and try and pull through a lot. There's a ton of pressure on this. I also greased up the rod, the threads, just because it ends up being a ton of tension, a lot of heat. It can break the threads, so just hedging our bets by greasing it up a bit. So from left to right, you have your hex head side over here, then your washers. This piece is from the bushing press set, which is just an adapter to hold this. This catches the bushing as it's pushed out this way. You have your 1 1/16 socket, which is going to push the bushing through. This is an exact fit, so you should have no trouble there. Then just a bunch of washers again, and your nut on the other end. So now we're gonna twist it to tighten this and see if it can just push it out. All right, our bushing came right out, fell into this catching sleeve. Here's the bushing. So one thing you just want to note when you're doing this is when you're lining up your pieces to squeeze it in or to press it out, you want to make sure the end of the socket is perfectly lined up with the outside of the bushing. If it's off, you're going to be pushing on the knuckle or pushing it in sideways, and you really don't want to do that. It can be a pain to kind of be finagling it back and forth as you're tightening the rod, but you want to make sure that's perfectly lined up and you should have no problems. Here's the new bushing, just sort of hand seated for now while I set up the rod. So we're gonna have the socket at the end with a bunch of washers behind it so we don't pull this hex head through. And then we're gonna have the bushing here. And then on the opposite side of the knuckle, we're gonna be using this other piece from the ball joint press. Reason we use this piece is we have this inside cutout that'll be on the receiving end. So when it pulls that bushing through, it won't be up against the flat surface. It'll let the rubber kind of exceed the knuckle and into here to catch it, if that makes any sense. So we'll assemble that and I'll show you what it looks like on the car. The do-it-yourself press is assembled. Left to right, you have the hex end here, a bunch of washers so it doesn't pull through, 1 1/16 socket, your bushing here, knuckle. Then you have this piece from the ball joint press. That's going to be the receiving piece. Then behind that, it's just a bunch more washers and a nut. You see that I also have a washer tucked in here. That's just because this side of the knuckle doesn't sit perfectly flat. So I'm trying to compensate for that maybe 5-degree angle that they're adding. So I'm going to do a little bit more adjusting here just to make sure this is pulling perfectly straight through. And then we're going to crank these bolts and pull everything in.